I don't think diet can cause IBD. I think it's a player in the symptoms that you have day to day, but I don't think it's a trigger for the disease itself.
Diet can absolutely not cause IBD. You have not done anything in your life to cause you to have inflammatory bowel disease. However, diet, when it comes to any health issues, including IBD, is important and something to pay attention to.
There's no known cause for IBD currently. There's understood genetics, environment, and microbiome and different factors that could impact, but right now there's no understanding of the exact cause.
I think diet can contribute to IBD, but I don't think it can cause IBD on its own.
From my understanding, no. Diet cannot cause IBD. There's different triggers for different people, and we're still very unsure of what is really causing IBD to happen. But I know that it can, cause more symptoms and flare-ups, but I don't think it's something that's you're gonna eat something and you're gonna get Crohn's or colitis.
But I've definitely heard about diets that can help or influence your symptoms of IBD.
It's a contributing factor, I think, in how you feel every day once you get the diagnosis, but I don't think anyone should feel bad about the choices they've made eating because of the diagnosis.
It is very frustrating when you have IBD to manage and figure out your trigger foods. So trigger foods are those that you feel or are causing your disease to flare or make your symptoms and side effects worse, as opposed to safe foods where I can eat these foods and I don't have any side effects and I can manage this and it's fine.
Safe foods are things that you can have usually like when you're trying to heal your body, when you're trying to make sure that you stay in remission, when you feel a flare-up coming along and you need the nutrients, but you don't want to agitate or react with like your flare-ups. And then you have your trigger foods, which make you feel uncomfortable and not pleasant, and your symptoms kind of start reoccurring. So you want to try and stay away from those.
For me, trigger foods are just any food that after I eat it, I've got the cramps again. I have to go to the bathroom frequently.
There are foods that people can identify that could trigger a flare-up or that could be really safe for them to eat in a flare-up. And they have identified that through tracking, consuming those foods and kind of seeing what happens in their body.
I think that's a long process of trying foods and eating different things and seeing what triggers your symptoms and what doesn't. Once I got IBD, I think I took time to try to figure out what foods are safe for me and which foods are triggering and can lead to symptoms.
One of the difficult things with IBD is everyone who has inflammatory bowel disease is on their own unique journey, and that 100% relates to foods and diet.
So it's so individual, I think that's also the hard thing about giving advice about nutrition and diet with IBD is it's so specific to each person, and each person just has to kind of go on their own journey of figuring out what works for them and what doesn't.
Everybody has different trigger foods. What can be a trigger or a non-trigger for somebody else can be the complete opposite for someone. And I think there's a lot of misconceptions with Crohn's and colitis that you can't have gluten, you can't have dairy, you can't have chocolate or sugar or fried foods, but I can. But the next individual may not be able to. And so it's really about understanding your body and like your tolerances for different types of foods, what you like, what you can treat yourself with sometimes, and what you can have on a daily basis that helps heal your body.
You take two people with the same disease, and my husband and I, there's different foods that will trigger, and it's very, very different, despite, in theory, having the same disease.
One food that could be really supportive for someone and feel really safe may not for someone else. It really does depend on just that individual, and everyone has really different guidelines for themselves.
What is a trigger food for me may not be a trigger food for you, may be a safe food for you. I can tell you I have met hundreds of people with inflammatory bowel disease, and I don't think I've met a single person whose food, diet, trigger foods and safe foods are exactly the same as mine or anybody else in the room. I've also met folks just like me where their trigger foods at one period in their life are now their safe foods. So I think it's important for individuals to know that, especially when you're seeking support, when you're reading things on the internet, when you're talking to other individuals who have IBD. It's very important to acknowledge that what they are sharing with you about their diet, about their treatments, about their health journey is unique to them. So to take all of that information with a grain of salt, and what works for some may not work for you. It becomes your responsibility to ensure that you're documenting and you're paying attention so that you can identify what are the foods that are impacting you and in what way are they impacting you.
Everybody has different trigger foods. I, myself, can't have orange juice. That one sets me off. And then my friend's mom has totally different trigger foods for her.
It's also a constantly evolving thing. I can eat things now that would have triggered symptoms a few years ago that I couldn't. And it's something that's always kind of changing and something that I'm always checking in with.
Your trigger foods and your safe foods do not stay the same forever. For some, sure, but for me, for example, I could have a couple of years where I know for certain that certain foods are safe for me, and then they are not. And trying to figure that out can be very difficult and very frustrating. So I do recommend to keep a food journal. And in that journal, not only do you document the things that you're eating, especially around times where you're unwell, newly diagnosed, or flaring, would also be to track your bowel movements. What are your bowel movements? Are they soft? Are they form stool? Are you having diarrhea? Do you have blood? Do you have mucus? How frequent? How often? And you really have to stick to doing that food journal and that documentation for quite a long period of time, because it's often not until you start looking back over weeks and weeks of journaling that you really begin to see what could be impacting your symptoms and your IBD.
But it isn't to say that you need to completely stay away from them. So if you want to have fries, and sometimes fries aren't really good for your Crohn's, or maybe that's your trigger food. But if you do a lot of the good, you can have a sprinkle of what the luxury items, like French fries, for example.
Also, when you first have surgery or really sick, it's like you want to be eating like white bread and no fiber and like almost like no vegetables and fruit, and you're like for a time. And when you're like recovering from direct illness, but eventually you're like, well, if I'm going to be healthy long term, like I should eat more of what is like quote unquote like healthy foods and figure out how you can do that and incorporate them. It's also figuring out how you can eat those foods, because it's definitely still important. You want to eat fruits and vegetables, but sometimes they can be triggering. But then there's other ways you can eat them. If you blend them, if you cook them. If I ate like just blueberries, they could trigger symptoms. But if I put them in a smoothie and I blend them up, then I can eat them. I can't eat raw kale, but if I put it in a soup and boiled it for a long time, then I could eat it. For a long time, I couldn't eat any like lettuce, like even like romaine lettuce I couldn't eat. But then I started eating like a little bit and it was fine. And I'd eat a little bit more and it was fine. And then I'd eat a little bit more and I'd do okay. And I was slowly kind of like able to, I feel like train my stomach kind of like it was a muscle, like going to the gym, and kind of like raise my tolerance of what I've been able to eat. You can't eat processed food for years and years and years and expect no bad results from that.
I think the whole topic of diet and IBD is confusing, in part because there isn't a good way to get a solid answer. So some people might say that they have trigger foods, and they very well may. Certain foods can certainly incite symptoms consistent with IBD, abdominal pain, bloating, gas, diarrhea, all of that. But is that actually exacerbating their disease is another question.